So, welcome to the third session of this course on managing change in organization. If you remember, in the first two sessions basically we tried to understand the dynamics of change management. In order to have a successful change, we need to see that there is one person or a group of person who are going to be responsible for managing the change effectively in the organization. So, on this session we are going to discuss about the change managers and their roles and what kind of image they have in the organization. So, when we are talking about change managers, basically they are responsible for managing change in the organization. So, what we are going to discuss now is the change managers and what is their role in effective management of change. Now, if you look at the role of the change managers are appointed by the organization, okay, and they basically initiate or start the process of change in the organization with the objective that how we can improve the effectiveness of the organization. So, change managers are basically responsible for smooth conduct of the entire change program in the organization, right. And the change managers are also responsible to see that how this transformation from the current state to the future desired state happens, and this moving to the desired future state actually is related to what you call improvement in systems, structure, processes, and also the development of the organization. So, ultimately the change managers are going to be responsible for this kind of activity. So, we need to ensure that change managers play their role effectively. So, they play different kind of role, like they try to facilitate the change process. So, whosoever is involved, they try to facilitate by providing resources, helping them out to see that what needs to be done, looking into the resources, organizing people, talking to the people, communicating to the people, also telling as a consultant, okay, what needs to be done, and if there are certain problems, also counseling people, okay, let us see that what needs to be done. So, if you look at the role of the change managers, basically they act as facilitators, consultant and counselor. So, the role of change manager is very, very important, and that is why most of the organizations you will find that they appoint change managers to look after the change management program, so that the organization improves their performance and effectiveness. So, ultimately they act as a catalyst. Catalyst is someone who is going to be there without affecting the things and ensure that how the change is going to happen, right. So, the change managers are mostly appointed within the organization. So, they are known as internal change managers, but sometimes you also take help of people from outside and they are known as external change agents. Okay. So, there could be two different kind of role that could be performed by the change managers. If they are from within the organization, they are known as internal change agents or internal change managers, but if they are coming from outside, they are known as outside change agent or external change agent. Now, whether we are going to appoint change agent internally or externally, they perform different kind of role, right. The only there are certain advantages and disadvantages you can say associated with having an internal change agent as well as an external change agent. Now, when we are talking about the change managers or change agents, we will also look into the role that who are going to be appointed as change managers, because they must have certain skill and knowledge and experience to work as change managers. Not everybody can be appointed as change managers. So, we also need to look at this very carefully while appointing change managers, because these change managers are going to be responsible for the entire change management process. If you are not able to appoint a proper and effective person who is going to look into the change process, then it is not going to be successful. So, you have to be very careful while appointing change managers for the organization, and it is the responsibility of the change top management to ensure to have good change managers, whether they are from inside or outside. Now, the kind of skill that would be required by change managers include like that they must understand the business environment. It means that change managers should know that kind of environment in which the organization is operating. So, they should have a very clear understanding of the business environment, which include external environment. It means what kind of technical, social, cultural, economic environment is there, what kind of say customers are there, what kind of vendors, suppliers are there, right. So, they must have a very clear understanding of the general as well as specific environment of the organization, which is going to affect the organization, because of which the change is required. So, why the change is required, that will take up later, but here we want to tell you that it is very important that change managers in their role cannot work effectively unless they know the kind of environment the business is operating in and how this environment is going to influence the working of the organization. Now, another point is that yes, they should know different kind of functioning, what people are doing at different level. Not in a hierarchical system, we have various departments and we have a hierarchy, right. Hierarchy talks about the vertical functioning here. So, we have to see that who are the people who are working at different levels in the organization, that is vertical functioning, and when we are talking about horizontal functioning is that what are the various departments in which people are working. So, we need to ensure that change managers have all the details related to various departmental functioning, that is horizontal, and also the kind of people who are working vertically from top to down, right, and they must be able to provide some kind of leadership at different levels, because if they are not going to lead, especially related to the change, then it is not going to be successful. So, unless they have knowledge about the business, they know who are the people, what are the various departments which are there in the in the organization, it would be difficult for them to provide any kind of leadership at any level. So, if they have good knowledge of vertical functioning, they can provide good leadership, because they are familiar with the things, and they also need to see that all the information that is required to bring about a successful change is communicated to all the stakeholders, and for that reason they need to maximize the information flow. So, they must create communication channels, both vertical and horizontal, including network communications, to ensure that all the information is communicated to the relevant people, so that they know what is happening in the organization. See, one of the basic objective of maximizing the information is to let people know what is happening in the name of the change, what kind of change is being brought in, how the change is going to be implemented, how the people are going to be affected. So, all this information would be required, and the change managers must be in a position to maximize this, so that everything is communicated to the relevant stakeholders. Another point is that they should have a shorter time frame horizon. It means that any change event should not take a very long period. So, they need to ensure that whatever time limit is there for bringing about an effective change should be there, because if you do not bring change within the deadline, then it is not going to be effective. You cannot extend certain things beyond a certain point. So, it is very important that they identify the time frame for affecting any change in the organization, and they try to maintain it. While they are working on change, it is also important that though they are devoting most of their time to ensure that the change is effectively executed and implemented in the organization, but not at the cost of their balance of work and family life. So, they also need to ensure that while they are working for the change to make it successful, they should not also forget about the other part of life. It means that there is a need to maintain a balance between their work and family life, otherwise they would not be able to work on a sustainable basis. So, it is very important to ensure that change managers, whether they are appointed internally or externally, are having these skills to work effectively. Now, apart from these change managers which we are talking about in terms of their skill, we also need to ensure that whether they are appointed internally or externally, they are going to work effectively. So, what we are going to talk now is that there could be internal change managers or external change managers. Internal change managers basically which is from the organization. So, they belong to the organization, and depending upon the requirement of the organization and what kind of change is required, they are selected. So, the only thing that need to be looked into is that they should have those skills which we have just talked about. It means they should have a good knowledge of business, they should have good knowledge of all the functions and they should also have good knowledge of the structure of the organization, and they should be able to provide leadership. And if they have these qualities, then such people could be appointed as change managers from within the organization, right. And second one is external change managers. So, when we are talking about external change managers, they are basically appointed from outside, and they could also be called as consultant. So, when we are going to appoint external change managers, we also need to see that what kind of qualities they should have. Most of the time you will find that they may not be familiar with the system, structure and process of the organization, but what they are good at it is the knowledge of the behavioral science skills, right. So, they are experts in what you call the human behavior, because if they are expert in human behavior, they will be able to extract relevant information from the employees of the organization. Okay. So, most of the time they work as consultant, and then they talk to the relevant stakeholders, they see what kind of problems are there, and based on this they are able to identify what kind of change is to be brought in, and they also discuss with the stakeholders that what kind of change strategy would be adopted. Now, since we are talking about internal and external change managers, it is always good to have change managers from within the organization, because they are having certain advantage over external change managers. But at the same time, we will also find that external change managers have some advantage over internal change managers. Now, what we are going to discuss is, if we are going to have say internal change managers, what are the advantages and disadvantages, and if we are going to have external change managers, what are the advantages and disadvantages, right. So, if you look at internal and external change managers, what they do basically, the internal change managers, they apply their practices which is required within the organizational norms. It means that they know about the norms and standards of the organizations, and they think that okay, the change is something that is an ongoing process, a continuous cyclical process, and they use problem solving skills to deal with the problems. Since they are from the organizations, they are very much familiar with these kind of things. So, basically their role is here to implement the change, because the problem is known, and then they try to find out a solution through problem solving skills, and then they try to see that how the change can be implemented. But when you are having an external change manager, they have a different view. They try to look at the organization from a different perspective. Being an outsider, okay, they are not going to be affected by the norms and standards of the organization. The reason is that they are from outside. So, they will have a more unbiased perspective, or in a more objective view of the problem compared to an internal change managers, right. So, they use certain diagnostic skills to identify the problem, and then they see that what kind of a strategy could be used for successful change implementation, right. So, they basically try to identify the process through which the change can be carried out after identifying the problem, right. So, as an external change manager, they are going to be more objective in their assessment. They are not going to be influenced by the working and the culture of the organization, since they are from the outside, okay. And for them it is a one time process, because they are going to act on one particular problem. Suppose you are facing certain problem related to say absenteeism, right. Being an external change manager, you will try to identify why this problem is there, that how you can make things better for the organization. So, it is a one time problem, you have appointed an external change manager, he is going to look into it, try to find out the issues, and then he is going to suggest what needs to be done in order to improve this particular process, so that absenteeism is reduced to a certain extent. So, both internal and external change managers are very useful, and depending upon the requirement they can be appointed by the organization. Now, we will also look into the advantage and disadvantage, that was I have been talking about. So, when we are looking at the advantage and disadvantage of internal change managers, as I told you earlier also, that since they are familiar with the system, structure and process, it is always good to have internal change managers. And there are certain advantages, like it is going to save their time, because they know about the things, they have access to the organization, they know about the business, they know about the function, they know about the culture, they know about the dynamics of the organization, right. So, since they have access to all the information, it is good for them, and it is going to be less threatening, because other people know him that okay, this person is going to work with them. So, they are going to be less threatening than an outsider, because an outsider will have a different perspective altogether. But at the same time, internal change managers have certain disadvantages, because they are not going to be objective, they are going to be influenced by the norm, culture, values, okay, the groups to which they belong. So, they are going to be more subjective comparatively, not all the time, but compared to external change managers, they are going to be less objective, right. And while they are going to deal with certain problems, they are might be influenced by the power dynamics of the organization, right. So, that has to be looked into, that they are not going to be influenced by the power structure, right. And then they may not be having certain skills or experiences which would be required from a change agent or a change manager to facilitate change. So, if you need to ensure that internal change managers have the requisite skill, they are going to be objective, they are not going to influence the power dynamics while facilitating effective change. And if you find that it is not the case, then you should move to have an external change manager. Now, when we are going to appoint an external change managers, it has certain advantages, like because for example, it is always good to have somebody from outside if you find that expertise within the organization is not available. Okay. It means you do not have such a people who can facilitate effective change within the organization. Then in that case, it is always good to appoint somebody from outside. And again, a person from within is going to be most subjective, but having an external change manager means that they are going to be very objective, and they are going to look at things from a neutral perspective, or you can say very objective perspective, and see that what needs to be done in order to develop the organization. And they can also probe difficult issues, which is not the case with the internal change managers, because internal change managers, because of certain compulsions, knowledge and experience, or the power dynamics, may not be in a position to either challenge or raise certain questions about what is happening in the organization. So, if these are the issues, then you should go for having an external change managers. Another thing is that they are having certain disadvantages also, like they need more time, because they need to understand the business, they need to understand the culture, they need to understand the dynamics, power politics in the organization before they are going to start their work, right. So, they need extra time to get familiar with the functioning of the organization, and sometimes organizations are very from outside, because he is from outside. So, how he is going to look into the things. So, they are really worried about these kind of things. So, top management sometimes are very conscious about these kind of things. So, another disadvantage is that sometimes the top management is not sure that how much time and effort would be invested by an external consultant, because he is from outside, he will simply do the job and go. So, if you think that external change managers are not going to do justice with the problem which they have taken up, it is not advisable to go for external change managers. Okay. Though both internal and external change managers both have their own advantages and disadvantages. Now, we have been talking about the advantages and disadvantages of the change managers. Now, let us say that what kind of image these change managers form, because when you are going to work as a change managers, you develop certain images depending upon what kind of leadership style you follow, what kind of communication pattern you use, what kind of norms and culture you are influenced by, right. So, as a change manager, you develop certain images, and these images are going to guide you how successfully you are going to implement the change. So, next what we are going to talk about, that image of the change managers. And when I say image of the change managers, means that the change managers, whether they are going to be appointed internally or externally, they are going to have certain mental frameworks, or the way the things are going to be achieved by them. So, it means that they must have made up certain minds that okay, this is how I am going to operate on this problem, and this is how I am going to solve. So, it shows that they have their own way of functioning, and they have their own style of doing the things, right. It means each change manager, depending upon the situation, the context, would use a different kind of style and image. Now, when I am talking about the image, what does it mean? It means that it talks about how you are going to look at the change and how you are going to solve the problem, right. For example, one change manager would treat cautiously to solve the problem, while another change manager would direct from the top that this problem is to be solved immediately. So, these two will have different kind of images, right. So, if you are confined to a particular image as a change manager, then the problem that comes out is that these images are going to guide you that how you are going to look at the change and how you are going to solve the problem, right. So, when we are talking about image, it talks about how you look at the change, and if you look at a change from a particular perspective, then you are going to basically ignore certain other perspectives of the change. So, if you are being guided by a particular image, then this is what is going to happen. What I mean to say that how you are going to look at the change and how you are going to successfully implement the change in the organization may be guided by the kind of image that change managers have formed, and these images are formed based upon their socialization, their culture, the norms and values that they have, the kind of management style that they have. So, all this is going to affect the way they are going to function, because change managers are also called change leaders. So, we have to see that how these change leaders are going to take up the issue to solve the problem and bring about the change. Why it is important to understand the image of the change managers? Because the change managers would develop certain frameworks within which they are going to work. So, it is very, very important to understand that what kind of mental frameworks and images have been formed by the change managers about the change and how he is going to take up the issue, right. So, it is very, very important to understand what kind of image change managers have. Then another thing is that different kind of change managers might be having different kind of images, and how they look at the change outcome, how they are going to interpret, perceive and manage change outcome would be different, right. And at the same time, different kind of managers will have different images of change managers depending upon their functioning, their personality, their mental framework, their management style. So, each one of them will have a different kind of framework. So, it is very, very important to identify the theoretical underpinnings of these change management images. So, what we are going to discuss next is that what are the various theoretical frameworks of these change management images which are broadly accepted and used by change managers. So, we have to see whether any change manager is going to fit into this particular image, because that is what is going to guide him to take up the change successfully, right. So, what we are going to talk about next is especially the images of the change managers. Now, if you look at the image of the change managers, there are two kind of views which has come into the perspective, as told by Palmer and et al. He talks about two kind of changes, that is controlling approach and shaping approach. Controlling approach basically where the manager go with a planned change and see that how it is going to be implemented down the line by the people, right. So, the approach is to control all the activities and to ensure that the change is implemented successfully in the organization. It means you plan about the change, you organize the things, you have command and control system, you coordinate the activities and you control certain things, so that the change is effected. It is known as a top down approach, because the change dictum comes from the top management. The top management decides we have to go for this kind of change, and then everything around is organized, controlled and coordinated in such a way, so that the change is effected and it is successful. Let us take an example to explain this. Say for example, top management decides to bring about a change in the technology of the production system, right. So, without considering down the line, the top management has decided, because they find with their experience, knowledge and skill that current state of technology is not effective and the production is not efficient. So, they want to bring about a change in the technology. Then it is decided by the top management, then down the line it is communicated, then it is decided how we can replace the existing technology with the new technology, So, they go about organizing, see what kind of technology is available, how we can coordinate activities to bring out the new technology, what are the things that we need to control in order to ensure that the new technology is brought in successfully and it starts working. So, this is the control approach, which is basically known as top down approach, right. Most of the planned approaches usually adopt control approach. Now, coming to another approach which is known as shaping. Shaping is where the dictum is not coming from the top management, right. Any decision related to bringing about any kind of change is decided on the consensus of the management. It means, it is based on participative style, where everybody sits around and then discuss, okay, we need to bring about this kind of change. So, it is more participative. It means that it is not coming from the top, right. The idea here is to see that how we can bring about certain intended change outcomes by looking at various stakeholders to ensure that what kind of change is to be brought in, right. And then you try to improve the capability of the people as well as the organization both to ensure that the intended change outcome is achieved. So, the difference between controlling and shaping is that one comes from the top, the other one is decided by everyone, that what kind of change we want to bring and how we can achieve that intended change. The first one is more planned and second is decided on the basis of the participation of all the stakeholders, and then people use their capabilities to see that how we can bring the intended change, right. Now, after discussing this controlling and shaping, the next thing that we are going to discuss is that what are the different kind of changes that happens. So, we have three different kind of changes: intended change, partially intended and unintended change, right. So, when we are talking about intended change, it means that it is a result of a planned action. So, change managers decide to bring about a change, they plan about it and they see that, okay, this is accepted by the people and change is implemented. So, intended change is always planned action and then you try to see that how this change can be implemented, right. Now, it is not always necessary that whatever you plan you go by that and you are able to execute and implement a successful change. So, in that case we go for partially intended change. It means that you try to plan a change, okay, but what happens is something different. So, there is a discrepancy between the change that is planned and the one that has occurred. It means that you have not totally gone by the planned changes, you have made some changes or some discrepancy in between and there is a difference between what has been planned originally and what has been brought in finally, right. So, this is known as partially intended change, right. In this case what happens, since you are not able to go through the planned changes, so you try to modify it once it is implemented as planned changes. So, you try to bring about certain changes in the plan to ensure that something is there if it is not going by the totally planned change. Now, third one is unintended change. Unintended change basically talks about there are certain environmental forces which are beyond the control of the change manager, right. So, sometimes you need to bring about changes because the environment forces you to go for these kind of changes, it is not a planned change, right. So, these unintended change are actually a result of those environmental forces which basically forces an organization to go for some kind of changes. The change could be in the structure, system, process, technology or whatever it is or the culture, but it is not planned by the organization well ahead, but it is a result of the environmental dynamism and what kind of certainty exists in the organization. Now, based on this two kind of mapping that we have done, especially related to intended, partially intended and unintended changes, and then whether we go for a top down approach or a bottom up approach or whether we go for a participative style, we use capability of the people and then in the first place you go through the planned activities. 6 different images of the change managers have been identified, right. So, if you go by the planned image, a planned change and also top down approach, you act as a director. But if you go by the planned change, but you use the capabilities of the people, you become a coach. Similarly, in the partially intended change, if you go by planned, then you become navigator because initially you start with a planned change, but you modify it later. Similarly, in case of shaping, you try to interpret the change, you try to see what has happened, and accordingly you try to bring about certain changes. So, you become an interpreter. Similarly, in the planned change we go about the top down approach, but for unintended approach you become the caretaker. Caretaker means yes, something is happening, so you need to take care of that. So, there are certain forces from the environment which are trying to force you to go for some kind of change. So, you go by it, go by it. Sometimes you are able to control it, sometimes you are not able to control it. But when for unintended change you are going to use the capabilities of the people and take everybody along with you, then you act as a nurturer, right. So, what very briefly what we are going to discuss here is different kind of image of the change managers, like directors, which basically work on that control basis, right, and they want to see that all activities are planned well ahead and they are organized coordinated control, so that the change outcome is achieved. So, basically you use a number of stages through which you go to ensure that all activities at each stage is carried out effectively to bring about a successful change. While when we are talking about the image as a coach, basically you try to see that okay, what kind of skills, knowledge people have and how we can use this resource or capabilities of the people to bring about successful change, right. So, here you use certain organizational development approaches to exploit the competence and capabilities of the people to bring a successful change. Now, the next we are going to discuss the two major approaches of basically images, that is navigator and interpreter. In navigator, yes, control is the most important thing, but there could be a number of internal and external factors, okay, which is not possible to control. So, what change managers do? They try to see okay, what is the context, what kind of environment they are going to operate and what are the various processes through which they have to go, how many of them can be controlled, how many of them cannot be controlled, and based on that they try to see that intended change outcome is achieved. And when we are talking about interpreter, basically they try to create that people in the organization or the stakeholders are able to make sense of what is happening, why we need to bring about this kind of change. So, they try to create a meaning for the members of the organization that why we need to bring about this change. So, they try to see that okay, they are able to understand why we need to go for a change and then see that how we go about it. So, this provides more legitimacy to the change managers, because they are able to communicate why we want to go for this kind of change. So, they basically interpret the reason for going of change and how it can be achieved using the capabilities of the people. And finally, we have third part, we have like caretaker and nurturer. Here as a caretaker, since you are not able to control external forces, you act as a caretaker. As a caretaker manager, basically you are directed by the top management to see what needs to be done. Okay. So, you try to do your best as long as possible, but when you are going to act as a nurturer, you try to see that what needs to be done. You basically try to nurture, because nurturing is something where try to see that what are the capabilities that need to be developed among the people and how these capabilities could be used by the people to ensure that it is going to help to ensure that the change is going to be brought in successfully. And finally, based on the change managers image, we are going to see that how these practically these images are used. Now, if you look at these change managers images, what they talk about? They talk about different kind of assumptions related to whether it is a plan change or not, and whether you adopt a top down approach or a bottom up approach, right. And depending upon the kind of image that you have as a change manager, you are going to interpret change differently. Like a caretaker, a nurturer, a navigator are going to look at change in a different way, and how they are going to carry out this change or implement the change would differ, right. And finally, you have to see that what kind of change manager, or whether the change managers are being guided by these change images or not, and what are the various perspectives which are available to the change managers. Whether you should act as a director or whether you should act as a manager, caretaker, or whether you should act as a navigator or nurturer, it depends upon the requirement. So, there are two things basically that I have been talking about. whether you are going to act as a manager. So, whether you are going to be bound by one of these images, or whether you should go by the one of these images to act as a catalyst to successfully implement the change. Thank you very much.